right, there we go. Great to see you. So, I really dislike giving very long talks, especially when I have alumni with me. And so, what I hope that people in the audience do is start asking questions. That'll be the best way for you to find out exactly what you need to know about YC. Very quickly, the reason why YC was started was because we believed that only a small subset of the people who had the talent to create a world-changing startup were being given the opportunity to. And the reason why, in our opinion, was because the investment world was really based on having to have existing relationships, having to go to the right school, know the right person, have the right family member, etc. And we thought that was a very terrible initial filter to figure out who should be building the most amazing companies in the world. So YC invented the model where instead of networking and pitching in order to raise money, you apply just like you apply to college or apply for a job. And I think that was revolutionary because within the first 5 years, we started getting people applying from all over the world. Today, 16,000 companies apply every 6 months to YC. And the current batch we have is actually the first batch that is majority international. So 51% of the batch is actually from outside of the United States. The second insight that YC had was that the relationship that founders have with investors is broken. The first reason why it's broken is because in order to raise money from an investor, the first thing you have to do is negotiate with them. So literally the first thing you're doing before you get help from this person is you are negotiating against one another. Furthermore, the investor has a ton of negotiating experience and the founder has not much. And so at YC, we didn't want to kind of create that imbalance. And as a result, how we fund companies is public. We invest $125K for 7% of the company. We do that deal for every company that goes through YC, and you know the terms before you even apply. So if you want to do it, great. If you don't, great. Either way, we don't start with some kind of complicated negotiation. I would say the last core insight that represents why YC is special is that being a founder is very lonely. Regardless of how popular startups are, for the most part, startup founders tend to be unique amongst their friends. Most of their friends are doing normal jobs. And so as a result, as you're dealing with all of the stress of doing a startup, your friends can't really understand what you're going through. So at YC, we fund companies in a batch. And so you can literally have a pool of talented people that can motivate you, that can support you, that you can support, and that you can compete with in a friendly manner. And a lot of people misunderstand how valuable this is. But in my experience, startups are so stressful that founders who have a good support system have a really big competitive advantage. The last note I'll say is this. Over the years, the value that YC could provide founders has really changed drastically. In the beginning, YC was the only organization regularly funding young technical founders. So I would say for the first 5 years, if you were a young technical founder, oftentimes we were the only place you could raise money from. Over the following 5 years, as YC's reputation grew, a lot of the reason why people wanted to do YC was because of reputation, status, particularly on fundraising. Demo Day is a very effective way to organize an auction of investors and raise money. often far more effective than what one founder can do by themselves. In the last 5 years, I think this has changed again. As there is more money in the startup world, and as there are more early stage investors who are interested in funding early stage ideas, I think the advantage that YC has today is around connecting you to customers. In almost every region of the world, we have a large number of alumni and a large number of active companies. And when you join YC, if you want to sell, you basically have a CRM pre-filled in with every alum and every company that's ever done YC. I think that's going to be the enduring advantage of YC. I think that our goal as we continue to kind of develop is to try to help all of our companies get to $1 million in revenue faster and then get to $10 million in revenue faster, which is the ultimate goal of any company. So that's a quick overview. I'm going to start answering some of these questions here. What percentage of our founders are from Africa? So let's see if I can do this. I'm not sure. Oh, yes, I can. So one of the things we did last year to make it a little bit easier for applicants to understand how the YC community works is we have a directory. And you can see batch by batch how many companies we fund from Africa. So feel free to explore. Next up, what are some of the sacrifices you've made in college and early career to help you get into YC? It's hard to say that I made sacrifices to get into YC. That's not necessarily how I describe it. I would say that the most important thing that got me to YC was my relationship with my co-founder, Justin Kahn. So I'm not technical, I don't write code. And Justin is my best friend in college, did. And he and his friend Emmett were actually in the first class of YC, building a calendar company. That company didn't work out, but for their second company, Justin TV, they recruited me to be a co-founder, and that went on to become Twitch. What I would say is the most common barrier to being able to build a startup is not being able to code and not knowing anyone who can help you. The thing that separates normal small business entrepreneurship from tech startups is that you have to be great with software. The companies that win tend to be great at building software. And so the number one thing you can do to put yourself in the position to be successful startup founder is either learn how to code or become friends with people who do. I would say that's the first enabling step. There are a lot of people out there that believe that software is not critical anymore. They use no-code tools, they use outsourcing, they use contract developers, they use development shops. It's YC's philosophy that for the most part, the startups who are going to eventually win are the startups who are going to build better software than all of their competitors. Unfortunately, in my experience, there are many ideas, and any good idea has a large number of companies attacking it at any given time. And so it's extremely hard to differentiate by having a unique idea. It turns out that having uniquely good execution tends to be the only way to significantly differentiate from your competitors over time. All right, next question. What are the tax implications of incorporating in the US? I have no idea what the tax implications of incorporating the US are. Here's the problem. When you want to raise money, from venture capital funds, what types of companies these funds can invest in is restricted by the investors of these funds. Most of the investors in these funds restrict where the funds can write checks to companies incorporated in the United States. Sometimes there are exceptions for London or Singapore or Cayman Islands. Unfortunately, that means that if you're incorporated with your parent company, the company that's going to receive funding, and you're not incorporated as a Delaware C Corp, the number of funds who can invest in your company shrinks drastically. So a lot of times founders don't really do the math on this well, right? If your company needs capital, you want to incorporate in a place that makes it easier for you to get capital, not harder. And so the reason why we want YC companies to be incorporated in one of the jurisdictions I mentioned is because we want it to be easy for them to raise capital. All right. There's a question about vesting for startups. I'll answer this quickly. There's so much good information written online about vesting that I'm not going to go into detail. I would say that typically every company should have a 4-year vesting and 1-year cliff. It should start from when you incorporate the company. Yeah, that's about it. It's pretty simple. So the next question is, as YC grows, can it provide introductions to enterprise customers? So to be clear, YC as an organization is much more about giving you tools to do work than it is about doing work on your behalf. So we don't have some team that provides you with introductions. We give you literally a database of everyone who's ever done YC, searchable, almost like LinkedIn, and all their contact information. It's your job to reach out to people and convince them to talk to you. One of the advantages, though, is that we've had 6,000 people do YC, and they now, or used to, work in companies all over the world in every different industry. So what most people don't understand is that the YC directory doesn't just connect you to active YC companies. It connects you to every alumni wherever they work today. And that means that you can basically sell anything to anyone. And that network only grows over time. How does the data from Startup School affect acceptance? I would say the biggest value for Startup School, there are two. One is to get you actually moving. There are a lot of people doing startups, but not actually doing startups. They are working on PowerPoint decks or pitching investors, but they're not actually building and launching product and getting customers. Startup School gets you in the mindset that building and launching product and getting customers is what's most important. The second thing they do is help demystify the YC application. So if you go to startupschool.org, it's a massive startup MOOC that basically teaches you all the strategy behind doing a startup. The same stuff that we teach at YC. It's free. You don't have to, anyone who wants to do it can do it. There's no application requirements. And in addition to doing what I said before, which is kind of getting you up to speed, getting you actually working on your startup, the other thing they do is have great guidelines on how to apply and demystify the application. So those advantages of Startup School, there aren't really any disadvantages, and the data doesn't really, how do I phrase this? What you do during Startup School is reflected in your application based on the progress that you're making. But the data that you submit to the Startup School website is not any really big determinant on what's happening when we read your application. Okay, tips on making a YC application stand out. Well, how about I just tell you what we look for? The first thing we look for is a team that can actually build the product. So who is writing code on your founding team and building the product? The second thing we look for is the relationship between the co-founders. Are these people that you've just met, or are these people that you've had some existing relationship with? The third thing we look at is your relationship to the problem that you're solving. Is this a problem that you have any insights on, that you've experienced personally, that you've tried to solve, that you've searched for other solutions for? Is this a problem that you're passionate about, that you might really be comfortable working on for the next 10 years of your life? And the next thing we look at is how much progress you've made over the period of time you've been working. So there's no absolute metrics you have to get into YC, but certainly if your startup's been around for 4 years, the bar is significantly higher than if your startup's been around for 4 months. We want to be intimidated by how quickly your startup is impressing, how quickly your startup is progressing. And then the last thing that we look at when reading an application is your insight. So if you have passion and experience about the problem, we love to come to understand by reading your application what you understand about this problem that others don't, that the customer might not, that competitors might not. We want to understand what your unique perspective is. What's interesting is that if you look at those 5 characteristics, out of the 16,000 companies that apply, we try to interview as many as possible who can check all of those boxes. I think this current batch that we're in right now, we interviewed, out of the 16,000, we interviewed about 2,000. And one benefit of YC being remote is that these interviews are now 10 times easier, especially for founders who are not United States, because we do them all on Zoom. So you don't have to travel, you don't have to deal with visas, so on and so forth. So that's how to make a YC application stand out. Here we go. Can we help with licenses and the bureaucracy of setting up a fintech or insurtech company? So once again, if you're expecting your investors to do work for you, you are not going to win. If investors are promising to do work for you, they're probably trying to get your investment, but they're probably trying to get you to pick them. But that's not how I see this game. Here's how I see this game. There's a set of work that we believe you shouldn't have to be great at. You don't need to reinvent the wheel on how to incorporate your company. You don't need to reinvent the wheel on what documents you should use to raise money. In areas where we think that founders should not be experts, we try as much as possible to automate those things and to take them off founders' plates. But for areas where a founder being an expert is going to be the difference between them winning and losing, we absolutely will not help. And so, if you are in a regulated industry, figuring out how to navigate those regulations, that's on you. That's going to be part of your competitive advantage, and YC is not going to hand you that. What we will do is you will be in a community of people who've done it before. And so the alumni can give you guidance on what mistakes they made, what they wish they did differently. But that's it. It's your startup to build. We're a collection of resources that you can leverage and use, but we will not build your startup for you. That's not how this game works. The next question, if you're building a B2B startup with quite a few features, when you raise funding or apply to YC, should you focus on just one core feature? I don't really understand this question. I don't like grading products by the number of features that they have. If you're a B2B startup trying to solve some problem, Your MVP should solve the problem for some number of customers, maybe a tiny number, maybe just 10. But the way that you know that you've created some value is not in writing code and launching features. It's in users using those features, getting value, and paying for it. It's that simple. When deciding which startups to take from Africa, do you have any priority areas or industries you focus on? This isn't really specific to Africa. It's actually specific to every country in the world outside of the US. The reason why startups can raise money to build software and to try to build billion-dollar companies is because investors believe that it is possible for them to build a billion-dollar company if they're attacking a big enough market. As an international founder, you have to communicate why you are attacking a huge market. I think this is something that is not obvious to founders. The United States is the biggest economy in the world. It is easier for a startup investor to assume that if you build a product that's going to be popular in the United States, you can make a lot of money. Startup investment firms operate under the principle that out of every 10 investments they make, one becomes a billion-dollar company. And not a billion-dollar valuation, but a billion-dollar exit. So if you cannot communicate why your company can become a billion-dollar company, the startup investment industry cannot run their business investing in you. It won't allow them to accomplish their business goals. So the biggest challenge you have as an international company is how do you communicate you're attacking a market that is large enough to be able to produce company that generates billions of dollars in revenue? That's your challenge. And I think this is something that's really important. The reason why the startup industry exists, the startup funding industry exists, is because it can produce massive returns. The reason why an organization like Y-Combinator exists is because technology startups can produce massive returns for investors. The reason why investors invest in VC funds is because they believe those VC funds can invest in companies that can generate billions of dollars in revenue. If your company is not in a position to generate billions of dollars in revenue at some point in the future, maybe 10 years from now, maybe 15 years from now, but if it's never structurally going to be able to do that, it will be almost impossible for you to raise money because it is not in a fund's best interest to invest in a company that can't help it accomplish its own financial goals. It's that simple. And so I think a lot of founders get confused by this because startup investing has gotten mixed up with education, and a university won't accept or reject you based on how much money you plan to make in the future. Right? A university wants to educate you and assumes you will do what you want to do with that education. And you pay the university for that service. The startup funding community does not work that way. The startup funding community pays you, right? Invests in your company, but expects return and needs to see a story on how that return can happen. All right. I don't quite understand this question. Unique execution, is that something you look for in applications? Maybe you can clarify that in a future question. So this is, does YC only take companies building their own software? For the most part, yes. I would say that 98% of the companies in a YC batch have a technical co-founder and are writing their own software. And so if you're trying to get in, it's a lot easier to get in if you have a technical co-founder and you're building software than if you don't. I've been helping a fintech company that's growing. Would they be a good candidate for YC? I think this is something that's always confusing to me. I often get this question, would this company be a good candidate for YC? And it almost implies that the application process costs money or takes time or requires flying to America. If you want to know whether you're a good candidate for YC, apply. It takes about 2 hours. If you're not willing to invest 2 hours in figuring out whether you're a good candidate for YC, don't apply. But the idea that you should know whether you're a good candidate beforehand, or the idea that you shouldn't apply because you don't know if you're going to get in, that's not the mindset that a great founder has. A great founder knows they're fighting against all kinds of odds and they want to take every opportunity they can get. So yeah. As a female founder, I want to know how YC approaches gender equity. That's a great question. So a typical YC batch will be somewhere between 10 and 15% female. And the first thing is that our goal is for those numbers to increase. The second thing that I will tell you is that there is a large community of women who've done YC over the years. And they can be a unique support system and give you real guidance on what the world is like for a female founder. Over 500 women have done YC. What I'll also tell you, though, is that the only way that the startup community will look like the world is if brave people are willing to be the early trailblazers. So if you want to start a startup, don't let being a woman, don't let being Black, don't let being international hold you back, because even if you fail, you'll help move this game forward for the people who come after you. So that's how I think about it. All right. So this is a common question that I always love. We're solving an Africa-specific problem. How do we pitch investors who don't have Africa context? First of all, for any investor who's investing all over the world, I'm willing to bet that they have more context than you think. For example, in Y-Combinator, I've read hundreds of applications from Africa and thousands of applications from around the world. So there's context. Second, as a founder, if you're pitching an investor who doesn't have context, it's your job to create it. I want to really be clear here. This startup game is a game that's ridiculously hard, and it requires you to be amazing. No one is here. This isn't school. Like, this isn't school. The responsibility is for you to win. There are people who are here to help you, but it's your responsibility to win no matter what. And so if an investor doesn't have the right context, give it to them. It's that simple. Like, if that's the thing that's going to hold you back, this is not your world. You have to be the kind of person who's not intimidated by any challenge. It's that simple, because you're going to get tested harder than you've ever been tested before doing a startup. Next question. So Mr. Mavani, you're asking questions that are literally on the YC website now. So about jurisdictions and incorporation, just look at the website. That's just a really basic one. Next question. Yeah, Roger, you're asking questions as well that you should just email If you're asking about your specific YC application, just email the admissions team. Roger, your second question is really a good one. A lot of people apply to YC because they understand the brand, but they haven't actually bothered to do much research about what it is. Or, God forbid, they ask their friends and they learn about what YC is from their friends who've never done YC. One of the most common misconceptions is that YC is full of a bunch of young people. Well, the average age of YC founders is 31, so it's not a bunch of college dropouts. Another misconception is that it's full of a bunch of consumer startups, which is also not true. It's over 50% B2B startups. And the last perception is that it's full of a bunch of startups that haven't launched yet, which is like hilariously untrue and easily researchable as false. So I'm fairly confident that in a batch of companies, you will have companies who are ahead of you in terms of progress and behind you in terms of progress. Just to give you a sense, in my group alone, there are at least 6 companies making over $100,000 in revenue every month. And my group just represents a quarter of a batch. So if you are generating more than $100,000 a year in revenue, you'll still have good company. I'm sorry, not a year, a month in revenue. You'll still have good company in your batch. Great question from Dominic. If you've applied before and you didn't get in, and you're applying a second time, how do you improve the chances of being accepted? So the first thing I will tell you is what not to do. Too many founders use the YC application process to figure out whether they should be working on an idea. If you let some investor somewhere else in the world who doesn't know you choose what the problem is that you're going to work on for the next 5 to 10 years, that is crazy. Don't do that. So you shouldn't be changing your idea every 6 months to see which idea gets you into YC. That's not how this game works. It's very easy for us to detect that. And we love those applications because they are extremely quick to reject. As a second-time applicant, you actually have a really big advantage over first-time applicants if you're working on the same idea. Because now we can compare your progress between your last application and this one. So the question I would ask you is, since your last application, what have you done to convince us that you've made a lot of progress since you applied last? That's it. And let's be clear, the things that convince us are actually moving the business forward. So launching, getting customers, iterating the product, and learning. If you've done those things between your first and second application, your chances of getting in skyrocket. If you haven't, it's a lot harder. The next question, do I invest outside of YC companies? Almost never. I don't invest to make money. I've made money. I do this job to give back to the startup community because the startup community has given me all the opportunities I've had in the world. It's given me the support I've needed. It's given me money that allows me to support my family and not have to want. And so I've decided that I want to devote all of my time and effort to YC and YC companies, and that means that I don't invest outside. Let's see, what's next here? This is a common question. A lot of founders mistakenly believe that the YC investment establishes valuation for their company. This is something that we write in the frequently asked questions on the website, but founders don't read that. So I will say it. It does not. The YC investment does not affect your valuation as a company. No investor sees the YC investment and says, oh, that's like now the valuation of your company. The current batch in YC raised $180 million before getting into YC. and all of their investors were comfortable with the YC investment, and it did not affect their valuations in any way. This is a question about how many dev tool companies did YC? Well, if you just go to the public directory of Y-Combinator companies, you can find that out yourself, and you don't need to ask. There you go. You can find out all kinds of types of companies that did YC. What qualities make a successful founder? That's a great question. Resilience. I think that doing a startup, as it's become more popular, people want to think of it like a career, like being a banker or being a lawyer or being a doctor. But the problem is that when you go to business school or law school or medical school, they don't tell you that 99.99% of the people in medical school will never be doctors. There's a 99.99% failure rate. But that is the failure rate in our world. And just to give you a sense, even within Y-Combinator, we'll accept 2% of the companies that apply. Of the ones we accept, only 2% will ultimately be successful and build billion-dollar companies that make an impact on the world. So 2% of 2% of Y-Combinator companies succeed. And so you have to think about this career differently. The odds are much closer to the entertainment world or the sports world than normal businesses, than any other normal industry. So when you think about the sports world, what it takes to win, it's typically three things. There's the talent that you're born with. There's the luck that you have along the way. And then there's the will to work harder and to stay more motivated than all of the people around you. And I think this is very important. In most walks of life, most people, their strategy for being successful is put themselves with their group of people and be average to above average. So if you want to go to college after high school, you put yourself in the group of kids in high school who want to go to college, and you be average or above average, you get into college. If you want to be a lawyer or be a doctor, same thing. The problem is that the average startup dies. So if you do what all the people around you are doing, you will die. You'll have to do something differently. That's the exact same thing in sports. If you're in your high school basketball team and you do exactly the same things all the other players on the team do, you're not going to make the next level over and over and over again. So I think the most important quality of a successful founder is that they are brave enough to be different than those around them. They are brave enough to do things that might look unpopular at the time. They're brave enough to do things that their friends might make fun of them about. I think that's probably the most important quality. Is it a must-have to have a technical co-founder? So like I said before, right? 98% of the companies that are doing YC have technical co-founder, 2% don't, right? You can get into YC if you don't have a technical co-founder. It happens every single batch, but the bar is higher. Let's see. When you screen companies applying to YC from Africa, how do you approach local/expat founders? You know, it's tricky. I would say in general, local founders understand the problems better and tend to have much better applications than expat founders. That's just been my experience reading a lot of different applications. We don't particularly care, but when it comes down to being passionate about a problem, understanding a problem really well, it tends to really help if you've lived it. So this is a question from Edwin. Y-Combinator only funds technology companies. Here's the trick though. Technology company can mean a lot of different things. What we mean by technology company is we expect you to want to use software as a significant tool to beat other competing businesses. If you are not interested in that, then probably YC isn't for you. But if you're going to use software in some tangible way to beat the competition, we're open to all kinds of unique ways of using software to do that. Does the location of an African startup impact the chances of it getting in? It does, but not in a way that founders understand. This goes back to how big is your market? If you are from a small country anywhere in the world and you communicate to us that you're looking to build a product just for that country, and when we do the math, it doesn't seem like that product can generate billions of dollars in revenue, then we don't believe you are going to be able to raise money from the investors in the startup community who need to understand how you can generate billions of dollars in revenue. It's that simple. So if you relate that back down to where you're from, that makes no sense, because you can start a company doing its software. You can start a company serving any customer, anywhere in the world, from anywhere in the world. But if you're not looking to build a large company, the technology startup funding industry cannot afford to invest in you. It's not part of their business model. How do you deal with the companies doing the same line of business as you and has managed to raise funds before you? Honestly, I don't care. If you look back through a lot of the products you use today, you will see that they were not the first nor most popular products when they started. When Facebook started, there was MySpace. When WhatsApp started, there was SMS. When Google started, there was a plethora of search engines. Amazon wasn't the first web store. So the fact that someone else is competing with you usually means that you're in an area that's worth competing. It doesn't mean that you should be discouraged. What books do you recommend to founders? So this is a question that I get a lot, and I actually prefer to recommend blog posts instead of books, because to be honest, they're more tactical. They tend to be more current, and they tend to be full of links. So we've actually collected all of the blog posts that we think are most valuable, and put them in a library that's public, that anyone can see. And so I just put that link into the Zoom chat. It's ycombinator.com/library. And on almost any subject that you'd like to learn about, there is good information about that subject. How do you assess companies that compete with YC companies? Another question that's answered on our website. We fund competitors all the time. It's not a problem. Okay, let's see. Let's keep scrolling here and try to find some good ones to end up here. So we already answered that one. Okay. Here's a good question. Should you do YC? Should you start your startup in college or not? I generally recommend waiting. I think college is actually a really special time to learn, to grow as a person, and to make relationships that can help you for the next 50 years of your life. And sometimes I see people who are so quick to kind of grow up, they don't appreciate the value of college. And so I would say that if you're compelled to do your startup and you just can't help it and there's nothing you can do, then great, yeah, leave college. But all things being equal, I don't think it gives you a significant advantage to do a startup in college at all. In fact, I think in many ways it's a disadvantage. How do we evaluate startups targeting the African market? How do we manage perceived risks? This will be the last question that I answer. One of our philosophies at YC is that we cannot be too smart. We cannot be too opinionated. I don't want to have an opinion about the African market, and I certainly don't want to have a negative one. I generally want to have the opinion that software is going to improve the lives of everyone in the world, and that there will be successful software companies serving every person in the world over the next 100 years. So I have a general positive philosophy. Now, whether your startup can be a successful startup in Africa is based on how you explain it to us. How do you explain to us why the market that you're attacking and the problem that you want to solve can be generating billions of dollars in revenue, if not today, at some point in the future, maybe far in the future? If you can make a compelling case to us, we will believe it. It's that simple. We're not in the business of betting against founders or having opinions that conflict with what founders believe. We're of the belief that founders invent the future. And if founders can be sufficiently convincing, we will support them in trying to help make that future whatever they think it should be. All right. With that, thank you so much for all these great questions. This has been amazing. Paul, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Jackson, thanks for hosting us. And we really hope that all of you consider applying to YC. But more importantly, we hope that all of you who are working on startups see success, see customers, see growth, and solve the problems that you want to solve for the world. The world needs more entrepreneurs.
Thank you, Michael. Before I let you go, there's one question that I'm surprised was not asked about solo founders. So probably, what are the odds for solo founders when they're applying for YC?
I would say this, solo founders get into YC every batch. I think oftentimes, though, solo founders should think about this question hard. It is so emotionally taxing to do a startup that you should really ask yourself, why do you want to be a solo founder? And what kind of support system will you build for yourself to deal with the stress? I think that's far more important question than like whether we will fund you. This is a really hard, stressful game. And if you don't have the right support system and you don't have a co-founder, you could have the right idea and great execution and still not succeed. So that's how I think about it.
Great.